Welcome back as we continue to look and read and study the Bible together. Apology for my mistake yesterday. I put down that we were in Mark chapter 6. That's because I do a lot of stuff a week ahead, like getting the one another group questions together and all of that stuff. And so, anyway, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure you figured it out because you probably were and hopefully have been reading Mark chapter 5 with us. But today we are going to look at Mark chapter 5 again. And as we read through it this time, well, we've already read through it today, just because it's always good to read through the whole chapter. But then we also want to stop and look at who God is and what God does. And so whenever we look at that, sometimes we get some places where we really have to look to a broader context of scripture to see what it is that God's up to, because it might not make a whole lot of sense. And that's today. And today we're reading the account where Jesus goes to across to the Gerasenes, and he meets the man that is being tormented by a legion of demons. In fact, that's how they describe themselves. They say that their name is Legion, and in doing that, we see who God is. God is the one that has power over the demons. He is the one that they know who He is, and because whenever they came up, the demon said, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" He is Jesus. He is Son of the Most High God. But in addition to that, we see that he is known by the demons, and he is able to just cast them out. But one of the things that we might question is, why did Jesus allow these pigs to be destroyed? Sure, they were unclean animals for the Jews, and so in that sense, like the unclean demons, the unclean spirits, uh, being sent into the unclean animals, there is maybe a tie there and something that we could learn. But the fact that Jesus knew that so many people were dependent on these pigs for their livelihood. I mean, these were herds. These weren't just free range pigs that were just being a nuisance. I mean, we go out and shoot wild hogs or wild pigs because they are a nuisance and they tear up the ground and they disturb the rest of the wildlife. That's not the case with these pigs. But as Jesus sent them out and they were destroyed, um, I mean, we might say, why would Jesus allow that to happen? And so it's not that God is petty or that God wants us to lose things, but there's a bigger picture that is there. One, it helps to illustrate what we've seen in their reaction. The fact that these herds were destroyed, and they said, "Look, Jesus, you just need to leave." Um, without that showing up, they never would have demonstrated their response, and so we then wouldn't learn from the response. And so while that might seem to be like splitting hairs, or well, that's kind of a workaround, we know that God is interested in the bigger picture besides just the minute details of what's going on in our lives. He cares about every detail of our life, but he where we get invested in that one idea, that one moment. He sees the bigger picture, and he teaches in the midst of all things. And so he prioritizes our eternal salvation over our momentary happiness or our loss of herds or livelihood or any of that. We see that he also, whenever the man wanted to come and follow him, Jesus said, "Go to your own people and report to them how much the Lord has done for you." He calls us to do what it is that he wants us to do. Our walk with him is unique. He didn't call him to be the next Peter or Andrew or John or James or any of the disciples, but he did tell them to testify about what God has done. And so, well, that would be getting into our response for tomorrow. But then if we keep reading and we look at what all, so who God is the God of all time who has the big picture. What God does, he helps orchestrate our lives, then in which he does teach us, in which he does draw us unto himself, where he elicits that response in us on what are we going to do with what God is how God is working in our lives and who God is. And so then we go into the next section where he starts working with Jairus, one of the synagogue leaders. Now, most of the synagogue leaders were opposed to him. Jairus, at least out of necessity, is willing to give him a chance. But Jesus, here in the compassion of that, even though this group of people has been against him, he still says, "Yes, I will come." even though up until this point he has expressed in this first paragraph dealing with Jairus, he has expressed no faith at all. But yet Jesus is willing to go. Once again, Jesus knows what's going to happen, but he's going to teach even through that. And now the woman coming up. Sometimes whenever Jesus says, "Who touched my clothes?" it's not. I don't think that it's not that he didn't know. I do think that he knew who it was, but there are several times when he says explicitly, like whenever he prays, "I don't pray this for my benefit. I pray this for those that hear this." I think this is another case whenever because as there was response of the disciples, they said, "Look, they're pressing up against you. What do you mean, who touched me?" And so he was bringing her to the forefront, letting her be bold enough. While she was bold in her faith, she was not bold in her recognition. She almost secretly or covertly came up to touch Jesus so that she could be healed. And so we see that Jesus doesn't want us to have a covert faith. He wants us to be in the forefront, not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of others. I mean, she comes, she gets healed, she goes away. Jesus knows who did it. Jesus knows what happened, and she goes home. Well, isn't that what she wanted? Isn't that the end of the story? But no, Jesus didn't want her to just be healed, much like he had told the guy to go back to your people and report to them. So this woman also should be proclaiming the excellencies of God, showing and telling what God had done. And so he calls her to a place, not calling her out like who did this, but then called her to a place where he said, "Look, your faith has made you well." And so he's able to teach through that situation as well. So who he is, he's the God who heals. Who he is the God that knows us and knows what we're going through. What he does, he heals. He also directs us and instructs us. He gives us peace. He gives us healing, but he also calls us to be his the ones that proclaim who he is and tell others about what he has done for us. And so then we keep going. We pick back up with Jairus again, and who God is. He's the God that is outside of time, and that everybody else came and said, "Look, she's already died." Jesus, who has now turns to Jairus and says, "Look, you see what just happened? She believed, she had faith, and she was healed. You don't be afraid. You believe." And so he taught Jairus through what had just happened. And so as he is the teacher, he is the healer. He's the one that's not bound by time like what we usually think of, whether it be with this little girl or whether it be with Lazarus or ultimately with himself. Whereas people might think this is final, there's no hope, there's no help. Jesus is above all that. God is above all of that. And so he goes, and he is once again the God who heals, the God who understands the situation, the God that's completely in control. He is the God that never gets caught off guard. He is the God that delivers time and time again. And so what he does, he once again, he has compassion. He teaches. He increases their faith. All of the actions that are going on in all of these situations, Jesus leads it to a place where he hopes to not only teach what faith is, but also draw people into a deeper faith. And he puts them in situations where first of all they have to respond to who he is. Will they come in faith, or will they say, "Hey, leave this area"? Will they live in obedience to him, or will they instead still continue to put their own position first? And he secondly is the God that gives opportunity for us to respond through praise and through testimony. So that's who he is. That's what he does. And there's so much more than that. But as we stop and look at scripture through that, on what is God doing here, and what is God teaching, and what is God revealing about himself, I don't know about you, but for me at least, it encourages me, and it deepens my appreciation for who this God is. And that's part of why we read scripture, is to know him and to love him. And I pray that's what we do as we continue reading his word together. Love you, Eastwood family.